Good day to everybody in TV land. This is Mike Hittner with Historic Point Basse Update, and we're joined today by Don Matthews. Welcome, Don.
Yeah, thank you, and welcome everybody.
And we're going to talk a little bit about what's happened at Historic Point Basse in the last few weeks and what's coming up and what the projects are down there. So got a little wrap up on our Wakely's Whodunit, written by Luke Conkle. It was called The Gun Illusion, and it was on Sunday, July 24th from 2 to 5 p.m. Didn't have a lot of people out. It was a nice turnout, I'd say somewhere in that 75 people era numbers, that sort of thing, but the participants liked it real well. We had 13 characters on the site that were everywhere from a school teacher to the sheriff to the rich man to the trapper, all different types of characters. And it was kind of I guess of one of Luke's simpler stories, because on the voting end of it, all 13, actually 14 characters got a vote, because even Father Seamus got one, because remember in one of the biographies it said that maybe Father Seamus hired a hitman or something, so he actually even got one vote, Father. So there was 14 different people that votes were cast for, but it was a lot of fun from Don and I. Don played the sheriff, and I played Robert Wakely, and it was a lot of fun as us participants. It would happen to be, I think, part of the problem, I think probably with the audience participation was it was a really hot, humid day. It was one of those days when it was like 89 and high humidity, so you'd sweat just looking out the window from your air conditioning.
But I think our audience or participants were probably higher quality than other years, because I got a lot of very in-depth questions, and a lot of people came early, and then when you come early you can go around a number of times and try to investigate it more, get into it. I think our audience got into it a lot more, and I would kind of disagree with Mike that it was a simpler story, and I enjoyed it probably more than some of the other stories that Luke's done, because, to put it simply, that there was no one who was not a suspect.
Right.
So everyone was a suspect, and there was a lot of information, a lot of possibilities. I thought it was really fun.
I think one of the things that's nice about it for the audience out there in TV land to know is that none of us characters know who did it. So only Luke, who wrote the story, knows it. So we can't give it away inadvertently, or we can't cast aspersions on ourselves or on somebody else, though we did. I kind of thought from reading the story, and now I didn't get it right, but I kind of thought it was maybe two persons involved, because there was some shooting later in the afternoon or early evening, and everybody seemed to be someplace else except for the victim, Dolly Hirsch. So I kind of figured maybe that two people were involved. It didn't happen to be. What happened to be Vicar Darby that was involved, and that kind of caught me out of the.
Yes.
I didn't really see that coming.
He was one of the main subjects. He was one of the main suspects, but not that clear.
Well, and when we think of a vicar, a priest, we don't think of them murdering somebody. You know, they might get mad at somebody, but murder is kind of, what I consider, from my background, kind of out of the question. But it did happen, and it does happen. So.
But then the era too.
Yeah. That
was the era of how would you best put it, that the clergy wasn't that established. They were a lot of people that moved around a lot. You didn't know their history. They could have ulterior motives, and
And I think that's what with Vicar Darby was. Is he was an up and coming, fairly newly ordained, and to get ahead in a very unpopulated area, you almost had to establish something yourself. Like he was trying to establish this woodland chapel or something by getting Arthur Corby to fund it and getting the land concessions from the Chippewas so that they could do that. And so I think it was his way of rising quicker than if you wait for the system to make you rise. You might be waiting around 10, 15 years for that. He wanted it to happen 2-3 years. So I think that was his motive behind the murder and everything, and he wanted to just get ahead sooner. And
definitely was ambitious.
Yeah, so it was a good afternoon. Us participants had a lot of fun. It's kind of a unique event on our site, in the sense that probably the only other one that would be close to it would be our our Halloween one or
Spirit Walk.
Spirit Walk, because we have participants from community theater there. We have participants that aren't community theater. We have about 2/3 of us Wakely people, and then we have some people that just come in and out once or twice a year. So it's kind of a unique group of people that is put together there. It's not our normal. You don't always have the same cast that we have when you come down the site and then you see the blacksmith. That's usually, the same person, or you see somebody in the house and it's usually the same person, or in the 3-bay shed. This is kind of a different mix of people. So it's kind of fun actually working with these people. The beauty of it is, as far as us participants, is actually we never practice. There is no practice. Actually, it's probably better without a practice.
Yeah.
I think that we interact better and tell our stories a little better. And if we had it too scripted, we probably couldn't ad lib as well, or answer questions as well, or try to answer questions from the public as well. So I think in that sense, I think it works well for us.
Yeah, some preparation, but don't overdo it.
Yes.
I think also too, the Spirit Walk is more in-house authors or things that people have researched themselves. It's just like Luke writes the story. Many of the Spirit Walk people research and make their own presentation up. So it's more of a local artist
Right.
event.
Yeah. And it's kind of nice too. Luke has done this. I think he said this was his 5th or 6th year, and it works well that somebody from within the community, though he lives in Green Bay now, but he grew up, went to school here, participated in Spirit Walks with Historic Point Basse in the past, and then took it upon himself to start writing some of these, and it's a great effort. I just emailed him the other day and thanked him for all his efforts and his work, and do you have something in mind for 2017? So trying to plan ahead to make sure we got somebody that'll do it, otherwise I'll have to shake the bush a little bit and get somebody else to write it. But I think Luke will do it. I think he kind of enjoys the challenge, and
we have to try to get him for Spirit Walk, because I remember a couple years ago, I think he was one of the scariest ones. He came out of I don't know if you've been out to Point Basse, but we have like a little prairie garden there, and it was dark, and he came right out of the prairie garden. And I think when I was part of the I was just at the end where all the participants get to go on the final tour to see what other people are doing.
Right.
And it's like, I think he scared people more than anybody.
Right. I think he had a good presence there. He was Seamus, the grave digger.
Yes.
And he was kind of sitting in the prairie, which is kind of tall grasses and everything, and he had his shovel there, and he was kind of sitting there, and then he'd go like, "Oh, you sneaking up on somebody? Why, did your mother ever teach you not to do that?" or something like that. He made it really kind of like he was truly excited that somebody snuck up behind him and it scared him, and here he's in a graveyard besides, so he added a nice touch. So he's got the background to pull off a story like he's done in the last 5 or 6 years. So I'd like to thank Luke again for that great effort. Now we want to move on to our Harvest Fair, which is on Saturday, September 17th, and that's from 10 to 4, and that's our like the name implies, harvest. We've got the Giese family there. It'll be doing their sauerkraut making. They make usually about 50, 60 gallons of sauerkraut. And what they do is do some cabbage for us, and we ferment that, and then that's the sauerkraut we serve at our winter feast in February. So it's kind of a roundabout way that we preserve our harvest and crops and that sort of thing. So we got to thank the Giese family. It's been out there probably for 20 years doing the same sort of thing every year. They kind of make it a family event, and they come out to the site and do their shredding of the cabbage, and then they tamp it down and all those things they do when they make sauerkraut. Another thing that we do and we use on our site later at our Spirit Walks is we make our apple cider. We got a screw press for making apple cider. Don has usually been involved somewhat in that in the past. We'll have to actually probably put an appeal out there for any of you that have overabundance of apples. We had, unfortunately, a late freeze when they were in the blossom stage, and we lost probably 80% of our apples down on the site. We got about 8 trees, but I don't think we'll have probably a bushel or 2 out of those whole 8 trees. And normally we get probably a dozen bushels or better out of there, and we have enough apples for our own use. But this year we're going to have to rely on you. If you've got some trees out there that are overabundance and you can't use them all, let us know. We'll come and pick them and we'll put them away and save them for even if they're ready at the end of August, we can still store them in a walk-in cooler and then have them for pressing on September 17th. So if any of you have that out there, we'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, we have to go out and purchase them, and as you know, apples aren't necessarily cheap. And if normally what we do is press the apples, we make our apple cider for sampling for the public that's there, Don.
Yes.
And then we also use that apple cider, we freeze it and then thaw it out and use it for our spirit walk, because we serve hot apple cider for the spirit walk. And so it's kind of a nice thing that you do, a practical application of what they would have done,
Yes.
and then we take it for the next event that's on the circuit. So for us,
Yes.
that's a good event. And then of course,
Even if it's a half a bushel or a grocery bag.
yeah,
I mean,
and it could be crab apples. It really doesn't matter the variety at all. Some people think, well, it's got to be a certain variety. Actually, a mix of
Yes.
3 or 4 varieties is actually better than a single variety. You get little nuances of different tastes and flavors from them.
If we have different apples, we do separate them and then try to mix them, so, so you're not getting something that's just all one flavor.
Yeah. So that's one of the events. The schoolhouse will be open. I know Bev will be in the schoolhouse in the morning, and in the afternoon the master gardeners will be in there, and they got some projects for the kids and everything, so that's usually pretty exciting. They'll probably be getting ready for fall, something for feeding the birds or something like that.
We still have some ice yet. We usually bring blocks of ice out, and you can demonstrate the sawing and the chipping and the grinding of ice and things like
we
that.
really haven't touched that ice house since I think the bicycle group came through in mid-June.
Yes.
So it'll be kind of interesting to see actually what is left, because we've had as you folks know out there, we've had a hot summer. I mean, it's been a good old-fashioned summer. So this is all stored under sawdust, and of course the mass is what gives you anything left at the end of the year. But since we took out probably half of it at the festival, in our June festival, and just a couple blocks to show to the bicycle group when they pass through, we don't really have an idea. I'm thinking we got maybe a row or 2 in there yet, and that hopefully we'll have that. And it's kind of nice to see that in September, because the Wakeleys would have had an ice house big enough to last until the new ice was cut pretty much. And how do you preserve things, folks? If you don't have a refrigerator or freezer or anything like that, you make your own best condition that you can for that.
Yes. Usually, in the center, it's probably the whole ice storage is the ice itself physically is about probably 5 by 5 and maybe another 5 foot high.
Right.
And after our harvest fair, our fest, our main fest in June, there's probably about half that, so about 2.5 feet. And typically, when we open it up in early September, you have 1 or 2 blocks right in the middle that are almost the same size as they were in January, which is really amazing.
Yeah.
And then the perimeter,
Kind of shrunken up or something.
But it really is amazing how well that does keep.
And it's just sawdust. And for them, it was a beautiful marriage of what materials they had available. They had ice in the wintertime, and they had sawdust because there were lots of sawmills and shingle mills and things around the area, so they could collect both of them fairly easily, and it was basically byproducts. It wasn't something they had to go out and purchase. So I think that we've all gotten too used to refrigerators and freezers. We even got some of these refrigerators that make ice cubes nowadays. But I think when you realize how hard it was for them, that it was a big event for them. The blacksmith shop will be open. I don't know exactly who will be in the blacksmith shop, but one of our blacksmiths. We have a couple blacksmiths on site. 3-bay shed will be open. Don will be there. Probably a couple others demonstrating and besides making apple cider, probably working on some projects or just showing you the Sawyer's Bay or something like that. Yeah. The barn will be open. I don't think we'll have any animals, but we'll be maybe demonstrating a little bit of the corn grinding and the corn shelling and those sort of things that they would have done in the barn, and probably getting some of that harvest put away that they maybe harvested the corn and that sort of thing.
And Jim will be in the carpenter shop. He always has a lot of
little projects. Yeah. And sometimes we even get involved with some of the projects the kids can kind of make. I know in the past you've done a couple different projects for the kids, like a candle holder or something. They were dipping candles, I guess, on one side, and they came over and they made a little holder for that candle or something.
Oh, yes, that was when the Girl Scouts came.
Girl Scouts, yeah. So it's kind of nice to we've got a big enough center bay there now that's the carpenter shop that we got a nice big bench there where we can, 3, 4, or 5 kids could help out and work on their little projects side by side with some guidance of one of the carpenters there.
Yeah, if you haven't been out to Wakely in the last, say, 2 years, we revamped the Carpenter Sawyer shop and the timber demonstration to make it more accessible, more open, more practical, and so it's quite interesting. I know people have really said they liked it much better.
I think it's more readily, people can see what's happening, they can sometimes partake, and depending on what's going on, draw shaves, whatever, they can do those sort of projects. And we're reminded all the time down there whenever we got a project, I don't know how many times since the bunkhouse started, we have the draw shades off. Now, just recently, we took some red pines down and for the cap on the bunkhouse. So we had to, of course, draw shave all those off. Otherwise, the beetles get in there, and pretty soon you got wormholes, and you don't have any integrity of your wood left. So every once in a while, we bring those things out and use them again.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then the cabin will be open for trading or whatever, and the house will be open and demonstrated. You also get an opportunity to go out to the bunkhouse. So the bunkhouse is a newer object on our site. Foundations put in last year. The building part of it has started this year. 16 by 24 feet on almost the identical location where the bunkhouse was originally.
It is a good point, because that is a building that historically was there.
Mm.
Unlike some of the other structures we have. So it's quite an important addition to the facility.
And the bunkhouse was for bringing seasonal workers in, people that were brought in to work at Wakely's shingle mill or
the rafts, build the rafts.
Raftsmen, things like that, places for them to stay, because the Wakely's also had an inn, but a raftsman, they probably couldn't afford to stay in an inn. They needed something less expensive and everything. So we'll have 4 double bunks in there. Be able to sleep 8. It'll have a stove on the north side. It's a small stove. It's called what they call a bedroom stove. About 12 inches high without the legs and 3 feet long. And I think it'll put out a pretty good fire for a small building like we have. Now, certainly it's just got the siding on it. There's no insulation, no inner wall on it, but for the few times we're going to be there and when it's really cold, I think we can stoke it up and have a pretty good fire, so I think it'll work out good. We got cedar shingles on the roof. We just finished the porch. Now I got to put cedar shingles on that. That's turned out really nice. I think that was a nice addition. Yes. And we got to put flooring in. I've got to call up our party that the Hams that have some flooring they donated for the warehouse, and hopefully they've got enough left we can do the floor in there. And just talked to Kenny Harchie this morning from Florida, and he was asking about placement of the we have electricity there, folks. We don't show it, but we have it into the building.
For maintenance and emergencies.
Yeah, and he was just saying, well, where are you going to place this and everything? He didn't want it, he thought better not on the wall and the floor, and I think I agree with him. The floor would probably be a better spot and easier to hide, because we don't want people to see that we got a plug-ins there and that sort of thing, but we can put something on top of it, a wood box or something like that. So discussed that with Kenny this morning, amongst other things from Florida. So
that's one thing that, while we're talking about it, just so you know, if you do go to Wakely, we do have fire extinguishers in every building. They are hopefully hidden to where no one knows it, but it should be well known that there are fire extinguishers. If there are emergencies in those buildings, there are things that, to take care of emergencies.
It's one of those things that you really can't take a chance on. We certainly have insurance, but a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into these buildings that I don't think somebody writing you a check for $15,000 or $20,000 could ever repay for what went into that. And of course, on the bunkhouse especially, a lot of the materials were things that we helped to take some trees down if a member had on their property.
And some of it on our own at the new maintenance shed.
Yeah.
Those were, I think, 3 large pines that went right into the bunkhouse. It was really an amazing experience to take a tree, saw it down, mill it, bring it, dry it, and create the bunkhouse. Because
Yeah.
that's one thing I think that it will strike people, because it even strikes us that people that are working on it, there's just so much wood involved in this.
Yes.
It's, because you can go in the building and everything's exposed, you can see all the wood. It's really striking when you
Yeah.
come in. It's
And,
impressive.
and Don was inquiring the other day. We were putting up one of our last pieces of siding on the one wall we were working on before we quit. I think it was 3 o'clock yesterday, in our workday Mondays. And Don was saying, well, that looks like it was a circular saw or something that cut that. And I says, well, that probably came from a donation of lumber from somebody else, because most of the things we had, it was more of a, what do you call the type of saw they have?
Well, it would been a more of a, well, it would have came from a pit saw, which is basically a up and down saw. So the lines on the wood are straight up and down. So,
Rather than making a circle.
yes.
And sort of thing, and so
Which is period there, which almost would be earlier than the circular saw.
Right.
And that's kind of serendipitous, in the fact that that probably would have happened back then anyway. You wouldn't have had wood from one source. It would have been wood that maybe from different sources donated, or Wake Robert might have bought some boards from some people or some other people, and,
Yeah, and
nothing would have matched.
Right.
So
and
it worked out well.
In the Wakely's day, you can imagine all these lumber rafts going through these rocks and rapids. Some of those broke up, and I'm sure he sent his boys out in the river to collect some of that free lumber that's floating by.
Definitely.
Once it breaks apart, it's not part of that lumber raft anymore. So we could see that years ago, and some of the rafters were on the floor rafters in the basement of the house, and some of them were gouged out, and we just surmised that maybe came through some rocks and just got cut up going through the rocks, and it got gouged a little bit. And Wakely wasn't adverse to using that as long as it was structurally strong enough, and most of those were 2x12s, a full 2x12.
Yes.
So
you will see that in the bunkhouse also. Some of the lumber is really quite old, and even kind of questionable whether they'd used it. So I think that also was something we were kind of questioning whether we should have done in it, but in the end, they wouldn't have had a problem using something that wasn't quite that nice.
And I think the use of the different lumbers, like Don has been talking about, actually tells a story in itself.
Yes.
That these people weren't wealthy by any means. They didn't have a lumber yard to go buy this at. They harvested it themselves, or maybe they bought it from a neighbor that did some harvesting and sawing, or they had some lumber they tore down another building and saved the lumber. Don and I both remember years ago when people built houses, they took some other houses down and they saved every nail. I remember people in our neighborhood straightening out nails and putting them in a can. They saved every nail. They pulled every board, and they reused those, and they built a house out of it. Nowadays, of course, it's out at the landfill, unfortunately, and of course, some of that older, newer lumber, particle board and everything, well, it's got one lifetime, so I don't know if you'd use it again, but in the old days when it had all dimensional type lumber, I mean, a lot of people tore those houses apart and saved them for building their house.
Over and over.
Over and over, yeah. So we're basically recycling it too, and a lot of them you'll see in our bunkhouse were actually cut, because they might have been 2x8s and we cut them into 2x4s or something like that. So there's a couple of them that Don and I looked at later, and we decided, well, we better knock those out, because I don't know if there's any structural integrity there.
So we did have to change our mind.
We had to change our mind on a couple, but the rest of them are there, and there's some of them that are a little, I think they're structural integrity, but they're a little challenged. So I mean, if we would have had a better one to use at the time, I think we would have used a better one. I think we used almost everything we had until we got that new lumber from those trees we had cut down. Otherwise, last fall, I think we were going through everything we had just to get things straightened out, what we had. And some of this lumber had been saved for probably 10 or 15 years that people had given to us, or we had taken a building down and just stored it for a future use.
And we don't want to give the impression that this building is not safe. In fact, it's we've tried to incorporate a lot of structural code requirements as far as hurricane clips and tie downs, so this building is all tied together with metal. Obviously, it's hidden, so the public can't see it. But this building should be very equivalent to any modern building as far as being able to withstand wind and storms and everything like that. So it's very stable. It's a very stable structure,
Yeah.
and that's what we was really trying to incorporate. We worked hard to do that. It was quite a challenge to conceal all these things in there for the structural integrity.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like Don was saying, a lot of steel straps and things that are tying things together, tying the upper deck with the wall structure and that sort of thing. And so and all these things you really won't see, because if there was something shown, it was in front of the siding, and now with the siding going over it, you won't see it from the inside, and of course the outside it's covered. So we do like to build as old a style as we can, but we also want to have integrity there, because you, the public, are there and we're partaking in those buildings, and certainly you don't want anything to happen. So I think it would probably meet or beat most any day modern codes.
Yes, and my history, my career was in construction, so I would attest to that.
Yes, yeah. So come on out, and if you get a chance, check out the bunkhouse. You'll be able to see the progress, and I would think by Harvest Fair, September 17th, maybe even have the floor in. It's a possibility the floor, or part of the floor in anyway. I think we'll be getting to that point at that side, because I would think a couple more work days for the siding, and we should be pretty much close to that. We got to put the cap on the roof, and Donna and I will face that probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. They got to do some cutting on that. It's going to be probably an all-day project just for several people to work on that cap. We're doing a little different cap. We cut these red pine, as we mentioned before, and we're going to kind of V it out, hollow it out in a V shape, and then connect that to the cap. Where in the previous years we've used like cedar boards, 1x4, 1x6, and we've kind of overlapped at the top, and then just used that as a cap. So we're trying to use a little different technique. All of our buildings, we try to tweak them a little different so they look a little different, because the Wakeleys wouldn't have built everything identical. I mean, you went to saw 4 buildings there and they look like they're a cookie cutter sort of thing. They would have had different, because you can see it even when you come down. Our roof lines are a little different. Warehouse probably the most different, because it's got a kind of an offset center, and the roof that faces the public from the east, is a very long roof. It's a shorter, more steep roof on the west side.
It's an unequal pitch roof.
Yeah, and part of that, is because of materials as much as anything. We look at what materials we have available, and Don says, I don't know if we got enough for a normal pitch roof on that. So and he asked about, well, what about this unequal? I said, that's fine. I mean, they would have worked with what materials they had. So,
yes.
and that's how we salvaged and used as much out of that old horse barn that is now the warehouse, that came from the other side of Pittsville. And that's how we kind of work on things. So,
that was another amazing building, know. And if you get there, there's an example of whitewashing in there, and that was a great idea of Mike's and Tom's. Was it just you and Tom, or something?
Yeah, I think Tom and I and Johan done it. Yeah.
Because that was very practical back then, because it also kept the the insects away.
Yeah. And then we originally started it. It turned out to be a beautiful project. The only problem is we had to lower the roof level, because we didn't have enough good quality things left to keep the height we wanted. So when you enter at about 5 foot. So you have to duck your head, and then up on the gable on the other side, we've got a double kind of doors that open up that give us more light. So that was challenged with light. And so the way to get around the challenge with light, Tom and I think probably Tom came up with the idea. He says, what about whitewash? And he says, well, that's been around for probably a couple thousand years. They've been whitewashing things. So we looked at whitewash, and we gave it one coat, and it did pretty good job, and it lightened it up probably 50%. But then we gave it the second coat, and it really, where sometimes before that had soaked into the wood so much and was kind of lost, that second coat really did a nice job, and it really brightened it up nice. Now when you go in there, it's certainly a little darker, but it's not pitch black like it was almost before.
It was almost scary before. It was kind of like,
Well,
you know,
and part of that was,
yeah.
if it's so dark,
Yes.
what's the usefulness of that
Yes,
building?
exactly.
Now, we know it's a warehouse, so they don't need a lot of light or anything like that, and they probably would have used lanterns or candles or something like that, because most things are stored in there and then they're not retrieved until somebody wants them. So it isn't like a building that's in constant use.
Yes.
But still, you want to make it practical. And so there was the ability to whitewash, which gave us the light, showed another technique for people used for preservation, and those old logs probably certainly needed it on
Yes.
the inside.
Yes.
Some of those logs were probably 125 years old and starting to deteriorate, and some of them we got to do a little spraying on the outside, not whitewashing, but spraying a natural preservative on the outside just to preserve some of those logs. And we have that kind of constant battle on our hands now, Don, where now we're just about getting to the end of most of our major projects. Now it's to preserve what we have.
It's a lot of maintenance, a lot
Yeah.
more maintenance, and looking at how to preserve these buildings and
In the best way possible, and to do it in a way that isn't conspicuously modern. I mean, we got to do it in a way that doesn't show off the modern techniques and that sort of thing. So I think, well, you want to talk a little bit about what you had looked at for preservative for the outside as a 50-50 mixture?
Yes, I researched it and went to Old World, Wisconsin, and asked them what they used, and they used a product, a more modern product, and I wanted to shy away from that because again, that had to be installed. You know, that had to be. It was probably 3 times as expensive as what we had decided on, and what we're using is a mixture of 50% boiled linseed oil and 50% turpentine.
Mm-hmm.
We had experimented with with more linseed oil and less turpentine, but it didn't penetrate enough. And we also tried tung oil also too, but the linseed oil and turpentine is more historically correct. As time went on, you get more input from other people, and even when I talked to some of the local interpreters at Old World, because I talked mainly to the executive people at first, and when I did a day tour, obviously, you know, I don't know if you've been to Old World, but it takes more than a day. I only spent a day. I got to go back for another couple of days. But you talk to many of the interpreters, and that's what they used, is a linseed oil and turpentine.
And certainly linseed made from flax was grown in this area, was available in this area. Now turpentine probably had to come in from the southeastern United States or something like that, but there was a lot of commerce already by the time the Wakeleys had settled here, and certainly within about 20 years after they had settled here. They came in 1837, so I'm thinking by the time of Civil War or right after the Civil War time, a lot of this new stuff had started flowing around pretty freely throughout the United States.
Yes. Well, it's really really great news that the old products are very competitive with the new products. The only thing that it might not have is a little UV protection, but I'm not sure if the linseed and turpentine don't have some natural UV protection.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we're going to do it on the warehouse. That was the impetus to start all this, because those logs, like I say, are 125 years old, and they probably weren't always under a good roof, you know, so there was a lot of
Rot and different areas that
so
were compromised.
Yes.
And then besides that, we have at the site, you know, powder post beetles, so we're going to apply some things, you know, like on flooring and things like that to try to prevent or at least minimize that sort of thing, because any of these buildings sit mostly idle most of the time, and there's no activity. And yesterday we're down, it wasn't a real humid day, but it was hot, and we opened up the basement of the Wakeley house, and we opened up the doors to kind of get a little circulation going, because these buildings are closed up a lot more than they're open. So we're hoping some of those sort of things work out. But
so the whole warehouse concern about the warehouse almost started a whole new, I don't know if a committee, but a whole new section of maintenance in the preservation of the things, made it much more an important part of our maintenance.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, Don and I were down in the basement looking for some copper, which we found from some old gutters and everything, and frankly, folks, some of those summer beams and everything in underneath the Wakely house been there probably now for 25 years. I'm thinking if there isn't something done to them, we'll probably have to put steel girders in there or something, and probably we don't interpret the basement now, but probably we'll never be able to interpret that just because there's so much humidity and moisture in that basement that we're starting to get some rot down there, and I foresee in the next 5 years we're having an issue probably there that we're going to have to address, and we may address with steel girders and just put something like that in there and just not open up the basement, not worry about it. We had hoped to interpret the basement, but the house has been done pretty much for 6-7 years, and we haven't made any strong efforts towards interpreting the basement because of other projects or whatever, and so I think it may be the easier and the less expensive alternative to just do that. I don't know.
Unless we get a great influx of volunteers.
Yes, yes.
But that kind of, we're always looking for volunteers, and it doesn't have to be a large commitment. We have plenty of volunteers that just come for one event a year, maybe a couple building projects a year.
And just to give an example, on our Mondays, normally we work, unless it's holiday, every Monday from about 9 to sometimes noon, sometimes 3, 4, depending on what we're working on. And we have some people I just call when we got major projects. Otherwise, I don't bother them because I know that they're busy with their lives. But when we got a major project, they're always willing and anxious to come and help, and they help for the duration of the project. And then I don't call them until I need them again. So some of those people, are called every 2-3 years, and they help out for 12 times, and then you don't see them. But I mean, that's the beauty of it. We have plenty of opportunities for you if you'd like to be a citizen. You'd like to do some interpretation, or even if you think you might like to do some interpretation, because a lot of people don't know. I mean, Don and I probably fell into it more by chance than anything. In the early years, they needed someone with Robert Wakely. I guess I had a beard at that time, and Robert Wakely had a beard, and that's kind of how Tom Bramer started with Pierre Charette. He had a kind of a longer beard, and he was shorter, and the Voyageurs were 5'6" or shorter, and so we kind of fell into those. But we can have a half a dozen Robert Wakeleys. I can't be there all the time, and we can have more carpenters. Don portrays a carpenter in the carpenter shop along with Jim Nickel, and we can have 3 or 4 of those, because a lot of times when we got events going on, like doing the apple cider, Don is drawn away from the carpenter shop, so somebody else could be in the carpenter shop, or somebody else could be doing apple cider. So, I mean, we have lots of, if you want to play a character, or if you just want to come down and do something, certainly we have those availabilities for you.
There's many times where either Jim or I will be working on a project, and then the other person is interpreting and talking to the public and sharing information. It works so much better if you have a couple people in each location.
And I think it works better for the people that are portraying somebody too. Yeah. If you can have somebody that can portray that, give the information out about what these characters are doing, then they don't have to break character. They can do the project they're working on, and the person can interpret it to the public. So I mean, that works really good. So if you have an inkling or anything, we got meetings on the first Tuesday of every month at the schoolhouse during the summer, fall. 6:00 p.m. So come on down. Usually it's just an hour and a half or 2-hour meeting at most. You're welcome, or you can give Don or I a call. We're available. If you got questions or anything like that, look at our website. Great website. You can even, by email, write in a question, or Jim had just told me yesterday that he had somebody that contacted him and wanted to work with costuming and stuff like that.
Great.
Hey, great. I mean, we got 3 or 4 of the group that are sewers and like to do some. We're going to start something this fall, probably on working on costumes for next spring. And when you come into the group, you don't have to have costumes. We'll find you something that works for you for temporarily. And then as you get into it further, if you want to pursue sew your own or buy a costume or whatever you like to, that's great. I mean, we don't expect you to start out with $200 or $300 worth of clothes like some of us may have accumulated over the last 15, 20 years,
Right. We just we have some clothes that we can start the person out with, and then it's up to their individual tastes. Because I think it's my 4th or 5th year.
I think 5.
And
yeah.
last year was the first time I actually invested in clothing. Otherwise I was using clothes that Mike had given me. Sometimes it takes a while till you know exactly what you want.
Right.
Too.
Yeah, you don't have that opportunity right off the bat. Usually, most of us don't know exactly. I want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
There are exceptions, but that's rare.
Yes.
Sort of thing. So, if you get a chance, contact us or check the website. We enjoyed visiting with you today. Remember, our next event is the Harvest Fair, and that's on Saturday, September 17th, and that's from 10 to 4 at the Wakely site. Admission $3 for adults, $2 for students. We're east of Nakusa, just off of County Trunk Z. You've got a brand new use sign on County Z and Wakely Road. You'll see all of our things listed there. It's lit up at night for several hours, so if you're driving by on County Trunk Z at night, look for our sign and the latest event coming up. But thanks, Don, for being here.
We'd also speaking of the sign, we'd like to thank Hume Elementary in Nakusa, because they updated to a digital sign and then donated the old lighted sign to us, and we installed it. So we repurposed that
sign, and so it's nice to see good use for something that's outlived its usefulness for somebody else, and that's kind of what we do down at Historic Point Basse. We take old buildings and repurpose them for old purposes, but redo them. So
we'd like to thank the people there at Humke Elementary, for their time, because it was some effort on their part.
They had to save it and didn't have, it couldn't take the wrecking ball to it to tear it out.
Yeah, so there was a lot of good help there to get that repurposed.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Don, for coming on today.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.